Thanks for tuning in to the episode of The Aydin Show, sponsored by our friends at Casa Homes. Enjoy the show. Welcome to The Aydin Show. The word Aydin means enlighten. That's exactly our goal. This podcast is to enlighten you, share knowledge and wisdom, and inspire our youth. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I'm Ahmet Uruch, and today's guest is Doctor Senem Eren, who is a psychologist. Welcome.
Hi, I'm really excited to be here today.
We're excited to have you. Look, so tell us, have you always wanted to be a psychologist?
Actually, I've always wanted to be a doctor. Ever since I can remember, it was my childhood dream. And that's what I was striving for throughout high school. I love the idea of helping people. That was sort of the thing that really lit me up. So when I came to the end of year 12 and I didn't quite get the marks that I needed to get into medicine, I ended up in a Bachelor of Science at university, and I thought, wow, my life's over. What am I going to do with myself? You know, you've had this huge goal for years and years and years, and then it doesn't happen. You sort of become lost, and that's where I was when I hit university. The passion never went away, so I started to enroll in all of the medicine subjects like immunology, microbiology, human anatomy. I was doing all the classes with medical students. Really fun stuff like cutting dead bodies.
Wow.
I did that for a couple of years.
That sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was lots of fun. It was probably around end of my second year, and I went, God, I'm loving what I'm doing, but what am I going to do with this? You know, I couldn't see where the career options were going to go. And I knew that I had a sort of natural strength for listening to people. I love listening to what was happening with others, the problems that they were experiencing. And I also loved understanding how the human mind worked. So why do we do the things that we do? What drives us? And it was sort of those two things that led me to enroll in some psychology subjects. And I realised that it was really up my alley in terms of understanding human behaviour. So I ended up finishing my first degree with a major in human anatomy and psychology. Mm-hmm. And then 6 degrees later, I've been practicing as a psychologist now for about 16 years.
Wow. Yeah. Sounds like you love learning.
I do. I think my grandfather was probably a key influence for me growing up. I always remembered him with books in his hands. And he loved to read, and he would read and reread the same books over and over again. And, you know, being a young child, seeing this you know, father figure in your life with such a passion for books, you start modelling that sort of stuff. So I've always been very growth focused. I remember getting in trouble as a child for reading too much.
No, you get in trouble for reading too much.
Yeah, I got in trouble for reading too much.
How do you get in trouble for reading too much?
That's how talented I was. So I would read throughout the day. I would read until the wee hours of the morning. I would borrow whatever I could get my hands on from the library. There were libraries back then.
Yep.
And I would hide my stash of books underneath the drawers because my mum would always be like, "You're reading too much. Your eyes are you're gonna need glasses." You know.
Isn't that too much TV?
I don't know. Like, she had this idea that, you know, if I read too much, that my eyes were I was gonna need glasses somehow. Okay. So I was always sort of trying to go under the radar with my love of learning. And it was this love that really has taken me all around the world. I've got this addiction to learning, to growth, to pushing my comfort zones, you know, doing stuff all the way from, you know, jumping off of a 30-metre platform in Fiji
wow.
to doing stuff like walking on fire, diving with the sharks at the aquarium.
Walking with fire. Who was that?
Walking on fire. Yeah, that was with personal development guru that everyone's probably heard of, Tony Robbins.
I thought so.
Yeah.
I used to see that on the TV and all on the ads, people walking on the fire. And,
It really bends your mind as to what's possible. You know, if you can walk on fire without getting burnt, you start thinking, well, what else can I do? Where else do I have a potential that I haven't yet discovered?
Yeah.
So I always think that I can only help people to the degree that I'm learning and growing, because I can't give to others what I don't have myself.
Okay.
So I always think of others as, you know, being inspired by what I'm doing or what I'm not doing. For example, one experience really sticks with me when I think of being a role model.
Yeah.
This was probably going back 9 or 10 years now, and I'm in the clinic, and it's sort of coming to the end of the day, and the door is ajar, and I'm just sort of taking some notes, wrapping up some files, and I can hear the conversation that's happening in the waiting room. There is a client that's just come out of another session, and she's speaking to the secretary, and she's like, I want to make an appointment for 3 months' time.
Mm-hmm.
Can you please have a look at what time prayer is going to be? And I'm like, why would someone ask what time prayer is going to be in 3 months' time? That just really captured my curiosity, and I couldn't help myself. Walked into the waiting room, and I said to her, sister, I can't help but overhear the conversation. I'm just really curious. Well, why are you asking what time prayer is in 3 months' time? And she looked at me with a smile and she said, I want to make sure that my appointment time is not clashing with prayer time. And I thought, wow. And she made the appointment. She walked out, and the admin said, do you know who she is? I'm like, no idea. Turns out she had a, she was someone that had found Islam later on in life. So she was a revert.
Yeah.
And I thought, someone who's a revert is just so sensitive to prayer. And I thought, God, I really feel like I'm taking this part of my life for granted. And it sort of inspired me to be more on time with my own prayers. A couple of weeks later, I was chatting with a friend overseas. He's a dentist. And I was like, I had this really inspiring moment with someone, and this is what I've done. I really feel like it's allowed me to be even more sensitive to praying on time.
Yeah.
And then I forgot about that conversation. And a couple of weeks after that, this friend contacts me and he says, I've got something to share with you. I'm like, I'm curious what's happening. And he's like, that conversation we had a few weeks ago where you were talking about that person in the waiting room and how she inspired you. Well, the conversation that I had with you inspired me to start praying.
Amazing.
And he's like, the story doesn't end there. He said, one day I was just wrapping up with my last patient for the day, an elderly lady, and her house was on the way to the mosque. And I offered to drop her off as I was going to Jummah. Lo and behold, he drops her off. She invites him to come in for a quick tea before Jummah time. He goes into the house. As he's having a tea, he realises that she's got a son, an older son. And he says, brother, would you like to come to Jummah with me? I'm on my way. And he says, yes, let's do it. Anyway, a few days go by, and this old lady comes back to the clinic, and she's like, I want to thank you so much. My son's an alcoholic, and that day when you noticed him and you asked him to go to Jummah with you was a really important turning point for him. It inspired him to start praying.
Wow.
When I think of this story that I've had the privilege of being a witness to, I think, there's this woman out there who's got no idea about all of the lives that she's impacted. She's just being who she is. But in being who she is, there's this ripple effect of change and impact that's been created. I'm just blown away when I think where else has that ripple effect got to that we just don't have the privilege of knowing.
Yeah.
And I think this sort of thing is happening around us all of the time. Someone out there is being inspired by what we are doing or not doing, and is taking their cues from us.
I agree, 100%.
Yeah, so it's a very powerful position to be in, I guess.
Definitely. Look, tell us about the time you met Patch Adams.
So
I remember watching.
You remember watching the movie?
I remember watching the
Yeah.
movie a very long time ago, and you kind of told me that you've met him. So
yeah, look, one of the highlights of my early years. Look, Patch Adams, they've made a movie about him. He is a doctor who dresses up as a clown. Robin Williams actually starred in that movie. I think it was released around 1998. So going a while back now. And he believes that laughter is the best medicine. And in my sort of university years, I remember watching and rewatching that movie. It was a real source of inspiration, motivation for me. And I was like, God, I wish one day I can meet him in person. Fast forward a couple of years and some friends in Perth.
what were you inspired by him?
Oh, God, look, I loved the fact that he was okay with being so vulnerable. He looks ridiculous. He's a man dressed in a clown costume, ridiculous colours, and he's okay to look silly if it means it's going to make somebody else smile.
Yeah.
And when you're looking that ridiculous, what it does is it brings down other people's walls. Because how threatening can a clown be, really? So you sort of relax. And I think what it also does is it helps people to tap into their own inner child, the part of us that's, that loves having fun, that enjoys playful experiences, part of us that we can sometimes shut away, disconnect from as adults. So some friends in Perth at the time made connection with Patch Adams and brought him down, and I found out through a friend, and I was like, that's it. I was on the plane, I booked in, I went to his workshop, which was all about how you can use love as a form of healing. I remember very distinctly being at that workshop and going, I'm going to do a trip with you sometime, somewhere. I sort of made a promise to myself. And it was a promise that, alhamdulillah, allowed me to bring to life. I think it was maybe 5 or 6 years after this experience. I saw an email that had gone out from the Patch Adams Foundation that he was organising a clowning tour to Japan.
Clowning tour,
yeah, which is where basically people from all around the world come together to a particular location in Japan. This trip was to Japan anyway, and you're dressed up as a clown, and you visit a whole heap of different organisations like hospitals, orphanages, the cancer wards, schools. And I thought, oh God, this is it. This is my opportunity. I've never been to Japan. It's close enough to Australia. So I secured my seat. And it was an incredible, moving experience. We were in Japan for about 2 weeks.
Yep.
With about 30 people from all over the world.
Wow.
And clowning and being silly and, making people laugh and playing games and having fun. And, for those special moments that we got to spend with these people, really helping them to focus on something else that wasn't pain, that wasn't loss, that wasn't, that was positive.
Wow.
Yeah, it was an incredible experience.
So you get to see some of these people obviously in these hospitals in really bad situations. And
yeah, look, one particular experience in a cancer ward still sticks with me to this day, gives me goosebumps. So this particular day, we had all split up and we all went into a room. And you walk into these rooms and you don't know what you're going to expect. So I took a step into this room and there was a really old Japanese man lying in the bed and an elderly woman standing next to his bedside. Now, I don't know any Japanese, but by that stage, I think I figured out how to say hello and I love you.
I know hello's important. I don't know about I love you.
Yeah, well, so depends on who you're asking, I guess. So I'm walking to the room and I'm like, hello, konnichiwa, konnichiwa. And I've got a few props, those little bottles with solution that you blow bubbles. Right. So I start blowing bubbles on towards him. He's got his eyes closed. I have no idea what his medical condition is, but he's not very responsive. Things are pretty quiet in the room, and I've just come in there like a burst of energy. And I'm going to start sort of singing, and I'm sort of just present there in that room. And then he opens his eyes. And I remember smiling at him and saying hello, and I held his hand and we just sort of looked in each other's eyes. And I felt this incredible sense of connection with another human being, and felt like I communicated to him so much more than what I have ever communicated to another human being. It was just this depth of connection, this depth of communication just by looking at each other. It was time to leave, and I remember feeling really overwhelmed with emotion when I left that room. And then I found out that this man hadn't been responsive for a very long time, that he'd sort of been really disconnected and in a lot of pain.
Wow.
And in the time that we spent together, he was smiling. His eyes were open. I was, doing spontaneous, playful things, and he was smiling. He was connecting with it. And I thought, wow, we sort of go through life sometimes. We get lost in that, in the day-to-day stresses. We start, allowing the small things to distract us from what's really important in life. And I thought, this man is on possibly his deathbed. Mm-hmm. And how easy is it for him to be receiving love? And when I sort of reflect on why that might be the case, what I sort of come up with is when we let go of all the trivial things, the things that are not important, we're better able to receive the things that are important, like love, like understanding, like acceptance. It was a very powerful experience. I had a wonderful opportunity to do it again. I think this was about 6 years ago. I went to Morocco this time.
Okay.
And it was very much the same thing.
How old's Patch Allen?
He's in his mid-60s at the moment.
And he comes with you guys every time?
Yeah, he comes with us every single time. He's been going to Russia for about 30 years now. He goes every year. There's an annual trip to Russia. There's an annual trip to South America.
Yep.
To the slums.
Okay.
And then he'll have spontaneous trips. So there'll be, places like Japan or Palestine was one that happened a few years ago. It just really depends on who steps up to the organising.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, so what sort of work do you do as a psychologist? Let's get into a bit of that.
Look, my work as a psychologist is quite diverse. Everything from treatment, and I work across the spectrum. I've done many, many years work with children. I used to work at the Children's Hospital for about 9 years. And then working with adolescents.
So what were you doing 9 years there?
Working as a psychological researcher.
Okay.
So I was doing lots of research. I was doing clinical work, so assessment and primarily assessment at that stage with children. So children, adolescents, adults is probably what I've been working with predominantly in the last 9 to 10 years. And couples. I do quite a bit of work with couples who, sometimes might hit a bit of a hurdle and want to improve things in their relationship.
Yeah.
I've got a background in trauma. So I did my PhD in the field of trauma. So I work quite a bit with individuals who've had a traumatic experience, stuff like a workplace injury or an accident, like a car accident, or people who've had traumatic childhood experiences or have been the victim of a crime as an adult. But I also work on the other end of the spectrum as well. So I work with individuals who have had really challenging experiences, and I also work with individuals who are doing quite well in life. Yeah. I have also got quite a bit of interest in positive psychology, which I'll talk about more.
Yeah. Well, what is your advice for individuals who are going through a rough patch?
Yeah, look, I think it's important to think of mental health as being on a continuum. Mm-hmm. So on one end, we can be really quite healthy, and that's when we have an optimum level of functioning and wellness and well-being. All the way to the other end of the spectrum where we become quite ill. Yeah. So healthy, able to set boundaries with the people around us, in tune with our emotions, understand why we're feeling different things, sleeping well, that sort of thing. Then we move into a phase where we start reacting to what's happening around us. And that's where we have sort of mild distress and impairment in our day-to-day functioning. It might be an unexpected source of stress comes into our life. Like, for example, there's an upcoming exam that you need to sit, or it might be a job interview that's coming up. And what's happening is we're being pushed out of our comfort zone. The good thing about being in this reacting phase is that it's reversible, because the symptoms are quite mild, and there are some simple things that we can do at each stage to get help. In this phase of reacting, making sure that we're keeping up with our wellbeing practices, sleeping well, doing the things that we enjoy that helps us to relax, it will sort of help manage that stress. Okay. Then we might move into a phase where our mental health becomes injured. And what that means is we start developing a severe and more persistent degree of symptoms. So, and that really are beginning to affect our life, whether it be our performance at work, whether it be our relationships, whether it be our ability to study. Mm-hmm. And the sort of thing that can put us in this zone is a significant life event, like the loss of a loved one, significant experience like a car accident, or being attacked. And when we're in this phase, it's definitely sort of a point in that continuum where we're going to need some support.
Okay.
The very far end of that continuum is when we become really ill. So we have a clinical disorder. It's persistent. Often it's severe, and the only way that we're going to get relief from this is getting the correct professional support. So when we develop things like PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in response to an event, we might feel really depressed. We might move into a space where we're using substances to deal with the distressing symptoms that we might be experiencing. So I guess...
How do our childhood experiences impact it?
Yeah, look, that's a really great question.
Well, impact us, becoming who we are.
Yeah. I think it's really important to understand our emotional needs as children. Mm-hmm. There's 5 key emotional needs that we all have as children. First and foremost is having a secure attachment to a caregiver, like a parent. And what that means is we feel safe, we feel secure, we feel we have a sense of certainty, because we know that when we need something, we can rely on that person to provide it for us.
Yeah.
And then as we grow older, we have a need to build autonomy. So when we're quite young, we're very dependent on our parents for everything.
Mm-hmm.
And then as we sort of move into, 3, 4, 5, 6-year-old, we start beginning to form our independence slowly. So we want to make sure that we have opportunities to build autonomy, which is all about building our independence and being able to stand on our own 2 feet. The third need that we have, the third emotional need, is limit setting. So we actually need our parents to set boundaries with us, because boundaries are very, very important for us as children to understand what is okay and what is not okay, where we need to stop and where we can go. And they provide us with a sense of safety and security, because we know exactly where we stand. We also have a need to be able to express our needs and our emotions in a way that's safe. And a part of that is having people around us that listen to what we say and hear what we need and what we're feeling. And then lastly, we all have a need for spontaneity, to have fun experiences, to have playful experiences. In fact, there was a very famous study done with psychopaths a few years ago.
This is interesting.
Yeah.
I like hearing these sort of studies.
I know. I've got an interest in forensic psychology as well. So basically what they did was they interviewed some very famous psychopaths, and they found that the common element between all of them was they came from a family upbringing that was very rigid, where there was no play, there was no fun. So that part of them became really shut down as a child in that environment. Often that environment was very toxic, very traumatic. So it's very interesting. We often forget how important this part is for children. Now, I am talking about children, but these needs don't change. We have these emotional needs as an adult. And part of being a healthy adult is making sure that we learn how to meet these needs in a way that's healthy and adaptive. So what happens, coming back to your question of, how our childhood experiences impact the adult that we become. So you can imagine as a child, we have all of these experiences with the people around us. And not every single experience that we have is going to be meeting these needs, these 5 emotional needs. And so what happens is when we have an experience where a emotional need was not met, then there's a gap.
Okay.
We sort of take notice of it for the first time. And then if it becomes a repetitive occurrence, what happens is we start creating stories as a young kid about what this means, to deal with the fact that there's a big gap there. There's an emotional need that wasn't met, that needed to be met. And
did we go through the 5th one?
Yeah.
Okay, we've done that.
Yeah, it was done there.
Yeah.
So when there's a need that's missing and it's a repetitive occurrence, we start developing a belief.
Okay.
Now that belief or that story that we create is adaptive as a child, because there's something there that you needed, you didn't get, and you need to be able to deal with it somehow. And as a child, we don't have too many resources to be able to make sense of what's going on. So that belief that served to protect us and allow us to be functional as a child, then we carry through our adolescence and we hit adulthood, and all of a sudden that belief that helped us as a kid is now leading us to feel stuck.
Okay.
So we call this in psychology schemas. So they're the maladaptive core beliefs that are keeping us stuck as an adult. So to give you a bit of an example to help sort of crystallize this, I remember being about 6 or 7 years old, and I'm fighting with my younger brother, who's about 3.5 years younger, as you do.
I have 3 younger sisters, so we were,
You can relate. And I remember being 6 or 7 years old, and I'm like, this is not right. I'm his sister. You should not be talking to me this way. And I remember being at my aunt's house and going up to my mum and dobbing in my brother, going, he's talking to me in this way. And my mum was knitting at the time, and And she took one look at us and she went, I'm too busy right now. You guys sort it out yourself. Now, it doesn't seem like a significant event. It was not abusive. There was no exchange of, nasty, negative words or communication. But this is an experience that stuck with me. And when I reflect back on it now as an adult, this was a defining moment where, as a 6-7-year-old, I came up with the story that there's no point in asking people for help, because when you ask them for help, you don't get what you need anyway, so you just need to figure it out on your own.
Okay.
And so I became fiercely independent, way beyond my years, and the way that showed up as an adult was I was self-sacrificing my own needs in order to take care of other people's needs. I found it really difficult to say no when someone asked me, when someone made a request of me. And so really it was a recipe for burnout. And so really psychology is all about understanding these beliefs that we form as a child and how they're showing up in our life as an adult, and then looking at what we need to do to heal those experiences.
Yeah. Okay. What advice would you give parents in order to raise healthy adults?
Oh, that's a very good question. You've got kids, don't you?
I do. I've got 3 kids under 6 years old.
MashaAllah. How old are they?
Well, the oldest one's 6. That's Malik. My daughter's 3, and my son Ilyas, he's 8 months.
Oh, MashaAllah.
He's popping his 4th tooth out. And he's learning how to climb things, so we've got to constantly chase after him.
1 times ahead.
Yeah,
oh God! What's just a question for you? What's been the easiest to manage when they're really, really young, or when they start getting mobile?
I think when they start getting a little bit older. I mean, looking at my youngest son now, I miss it. I miss like just grabbing him, cuddling him, and there's just a smile that he gives. Yeah, I miss all that. But as they get older, it does get a lot easier.
Yeah.
So my son's 6 now, Malik's 6 now, and he goes and gets his own cup of water or does his own thing now. So, yeah, I'll go read his book or go upstairs and play. Yeah.
Developing that independence from the sounds of it.
Exactly.
Awesome. Look, a couple of things that I would say to parents is love your children unconditionally.
Yeah.
And also understand that children need boundaries. That's often one of the big issues that I come across when I'm working with parents, is there's no balance between the two.
Okay.
It's either unconditional love with no boundaries.
Yeah.
And the kid ends up being quite spoiled, is getting very used to having their own way all of the time, doesn't have to work for anything, gets away with murder.
My daughter's like that. But she knows how to, I don't know, she knows how to be daddy's girl. She knows how to say things right, you know what I mean? So, yeah, but you're right, balancing is very important.
Yeah, so watch out for that one. And then on the other end, when it's all about boundaries, things are really strict, really rigid. There's really harsh consequences when you violate those boundaries. And often the kid doesn't even know why he needs to do something in the way that his parents are asking him to do it. The kids have got no understanding. Especially because they would ask you why, and you don't give them that answer. Yeah. That makes it a lot worse. So I've realised that my son asks us probably, a day, maybe 20, 30 questions. Yeah.
But I give him that,
Kids need that. Kids need to know why they're doing what you're asking them to do. And one question that you'll hear from, 5-6-year-old quite often is, but why?
Yeah.
Why?
It doesn't frustrate me anymore because I know he's learning, and he's at a good place. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is about finding the balance between loving your child unconditionally and also having some healthy boundaries. So when we have a look at the different parenting styles, the one that is going to create the healthiest adult when they grow up is a form of parenting where you're collaborating with your child. So it's a supportive, loving, nurturing environment where the child's needs are being met in a way that's consistent and reliable. And also there are boundaries. And often the child is a part of that process of forming those boundaries. so they understand why they're there, for what purpose they serve. And there's very clear consequences for violating those boundaries. And in that journey of building that muscle of recognizing, respecting the boundaries, the child is always given a choice. So, for example, let's just say 4-year-old, 5-year-old throws a wrapper on the floor and walks away. Now, a parent who's got this way of parenting would sit down with the child and say, honey, you've just thrown that wrapper that needs to go into the bin on the floor. Is that where it belongs? No, clearly. Okay, so the wrapper needs to go into the bin, but you've left it on the floor. What would you like to do? Give them the option. Sometimes they might not be at an age where they can comprehend what options are available, so you might actually give it to them. So you might say, you can choose to leave the wrapper on the floor, or you can pick it up and put it in the bin. Which of the two options are you going to choose? Okay, and let them make that choice. And then when they decide, help them to understand there's going to be consequences. So if they leave the wrapper on the floor, then the consequence might be is they don't get to enjoy that thing again, whether it's a lolly or a packet of chips or whatever it may be. And then when they do decide to pick up the wrapper and put it in the bin, you want to reward them for the positive behaviour that you want to see more of.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, human beings are very simple as much as they are complex.
Yeah.
So we know that all human behaviour serves us on some level. So what that means is we continue doing the things that helps us to meet our needs in a way that's positive for us. So if you want to see more of a behaviour, then you want to be rewarding the behaviour that you want to see more of. We as human beings, we discontinue the behaviours that are not serving us, that are not helping us meet those 5 emotional needs that we spoke about before, that are not getting us attention, that are not helping us to, experience pleasure and escape pain. We stop doing them eventually because there's no reward, there's no consequence that we want. So we continue doing the behaviours or the very things that feed those needs, that feed those.
So you're saying it's good to always give children a reward for certain behaviours that they do.
Yeah, I mean, think of your children, Ahmed. When you praise them, what happens? Yeah. They light up.
They do.
They light up like they've just been given an award. I don't have kids, but I've got a 6-year-old nephew and a 12-year-old nephew. And whenever I praise them and really let them know that I see them, I see how amazing they are, I just keep getting more of that behaviour. Why? Because it helps them feel seen, it helps them feel important, it makes them feel like they're loved, that they matter. This is a very important human need that we can mindfully and consciously give for children so that they don't have to go searching for it somewhere else.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Look, I guess is everybody capable of changing themselves? I guess their behaviour. So changing their behaviour.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Look, in order for change to happen, we first need to realise that we need awareness, we need insight. Sometimes we're doing things that can be quite destructive, but we don't even recognise that it's a problem. So the first step for change to happen is insight and awareness. Now, some people never get that. Some people never get the awareness and insight that what's happening is not serving their needs in a very healthy and adaptive way, and they just continue like that forever. When you have a level of insight and awareness to go, you know what, this isn't really working, or, I think things could be a lot better than what they are right now. It's like you come to a crossroad. And at that moment, you have a choice to go, you know what, this isn't working and I'm willing to do something about it. Or this isn't working, oh well, it is what it is. Yeah. Just because we have that insight doesn't mean we're going to shift to change. When you do decide to change something that's not working, that's when the window of possibility opens. When you have the ability to take something that's not working and understand where it's coming from, understand why it's happening, and then look at what you need to embrace and also what you need to let go of so that you can shift, so that change can happen. And the other thing I will note that it's important to understand the neurology of change. I think, some people I find in the line of work that I do who come to the point of deciding that they want to change think that that's not going to require any work. Change takes time. If we look at the neurology of the way the brain operates, we have neurons, which are the name for the cells in the brain. Yeah. And each neuron is in a network, so they're all connected with each other. And what happens is when a behavior in us becomes automatic, what it means is that neural network is really strong. So it's firing without even thinking. We don't need to think about it. It's automatic. So you can imagine the behaviors that we've been doing for years are coming all the way from childhood. And we've become experts at them by the time we've hit adulthood. So when we're talking about change, what we're talking about is creating new neural connections, establishing new neural networks by doing things that's new, that's different. And the only way that new connection is going to become strong is if you practice it. If you're patient and you keep doing the things that you want to sustain, until you've repeated it enough and the connection at a neurology level is strong enough that it too becomes automatic.
Okay. So you've worked quite a bit in the field of trauma. Why do some people experience traumatic event, recover well, while others go on to develop serious mental health issues?
That's a really good question. I've dedicated the last 16 years trying to figure this out.
That's actually my wife that wrote
that. Studies show us that about 60% of men and 50% of women who take a step back, 60% of men and 50% of women will experience a traumatic experience in their lifetime. So that's almost half of people throughout the course of their life are going to experience something that's going to really rock their boat, that's going to really shake the core of their foundation. However, only about 8% of men and 20% of women are going to go on and develop a traumatic response in reaction to what's happened. So a lot of research has been done to go, okay, why are the bulk of people recovering? And why do some people get stuck in those experiences, in those traumatic experiences? And I think that the very core of this is to understand that it comes down to individual circumstances. So some people, before experiencing a potentially traumatic event, have got a very good level of resilience. And what that means is their ability to bounce back from events is quite strong. Mm-hmm. A number of factors can connect or relate to why someone might have a strong resilience. It could be that they've got really good coping strategies, really healthy coping strategies. They have a good level of awareness and insight so they can see what's going on for them. They understand why they're experiencing what they're experiencing. And also they know what to do to help themselves feel better. They are resourceful, so they tap into their existing resources like support network, family, friends. And when they get stuck, they know what they need to do in order to get help. I think that's one of the most important factors that lead to why do some people have, recover well and some people don't. Yeah. I think the other part of that equation is that if you've been exposed to trauma multiple times, it's going to affect how well you recover. The research tells us that people who are exposed to a single event trauma recover much better than someone who's been exposed to trauma that's very chronic, so it's been ongoing for a long period of time, or from people who are exposed to multiple traumatic events. And I think what it does is it changes the way, it changes our beliefs about the world and other people when we're exposed to multiple events.
It kind of makes sense. So a kid going from abuse when he's young all the way through to his adolescence from, say, a parent or someone that's around would affect him more, definitely.
Absolutely. I guess the other part of that is what we don't heal persists. We continue to carry those wounds throughout our lifetime until, sometimes it's about finding the courage to address those wounds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess if someone is having mental health issues, how can they seek help?
Yeah. We spoke about that mental health continuum before.
Yep.
So, sometimes things will happen and they're quite mild and they're quite reversible, like a, very limited period of stress, all the way up until, we become quite severely symptomatic, like severe depression, severe anxiety, significant conflict in our relationships. So depending on where you are on that continuum, if you're on the mild end, stuff like, talking to a trusted advisor, talking to a trusted community member, trusted, person that you look up to, tapping into your social network, having chats with friends, keeping a journal so that you've got opportunity to just sort of process what's going on for you internally. Yeah. If you're on the higher end of that spectrum and things are becoming persistent and severe, that's a point where you really need to be getting some professional help, whether it be seeing a psychologist or speaking to your GP, seeking the support of a counsellor or a social worker. The first step would probably be, if you're on that higher end of that spectrum, is to go and speak to your general practitioner, your GP, and go, look, hey, this is what's happening for me. What can I do? They're going to be able to direct you to someone that's going to be able to help. It's often the starting point of a referral. I meant getting a mental health referral to see one of those health professionals. And also understanding that, we live in a day and age where so much is available to us at our fingertips. There are places that you can ring that are open 24/7, like Lifeline or Kids Helpline, or Men's Line, that irrespective of whatever time of day or night it might be, that there's going to be a comforting, warm voice on the other end of that line to hear what's happening for you.
Have you worked with any of them?
I actually have got around quite a bit.
Traveled all around the world, gone to Japan. Yep.
When I was studying psychology at university, I underwent the training to become a counsellor on Lifeline. Mm-hmm. I did that for a while, so I got trained in, and then I would do a couple of shifts a week, just answering those calls. It's a great way just to feel like someone's listening and connecting to a space where they'll be able to help you with what the next steps need to be. Okay. So when you get that paperwork from your psychologist, there are culturally and linguistically sensitive services that you can connect to, which means that we have these days lots of practitioners that are aware of how culture and faith might be impacting someone's psychological presentation. Mm-hmm. In addition to those lines, those telephone lines that we can contact, these days now you can even do online chat, like places like Beyond Blue. Yep. I've got online chat. If you don't feel comfortable or the circumstances don't permit for you to be speaking to someone on the phone or going in to see someone in person, you can jump online on a phone or on a tablet or whatever device and chat to someone about what's happening for you, and they'll be able to connect you to the right people.
Okay. Awesome. All right. What are some of the techniques we can do, or I guess what's some of the techniques we can do to stay calm?
That's a really great question. There's an important model here that
most of the guys watching would probably say fishing.
Yes.
and we're not happy that we're stuck at home not being able to do that, but yeah.
I know. Look, absolutely. We're all going to have our individual preferences. Men, it might be fishing. If we're going to be stereotypical, then women, it might be cleaning. You know, the sense of control and order that comes. I call it cleaning therapy.
Okay, wow.
Domestic therapy. And it makes sense, you know. We all have these preferences for things that we've done in the past that we know is going to be able to help us to feel relaxed and calmer. So from a psychological point of view, there is a window of tolerance that I want to talk about. And the window of tolerance is a space where we have optimal arousal. It's a space when we feel calm, where we feel relaxed, we're alert, but we're not anxious. It's a space where we can have connections with other people, also connected to ourselves when we're in this space. It's a space that we need to be in order for learning to occur, because we can think clearly. We're able to retain information. We are able to access our memory in a healthy way in this space. And it's also the space that we need to be in order to access things like creativity and problem solving.
Yeah.
Now, what happens is we can slip out of this window of tolerance, out of this optimum space of arousal. And two things can happen. We either become hyper aroused, so our arousal levels become increased, or we can go the other way and our arousal levels become decreased and we become hypo aroused. Now, if I was to go into some of the symptoms, so it's easier for all of us to understand what each one would look like.
Definitely.
When we're hypo aroused, what's happening is that our we're going into that autonomic nervous system. So the fight and flight response is getting activated. That's when, our heart starts to beat really rapidly, our breathing changes, we start feeling really tense. Emotionally, we're going to be feeling really anxious, stressed, overwhelmed, even chaotic. And we're also going to be going between, feeling irritable, feeling really frustrated and upset, all the way up to feeling aggressive and angry. Now, if we go the other way and we're getting hypo aroused, what that means again is we don't have enough arousal in our system, so we start feeling really flat, really numb. We disconnect from the people around us and ourselves. I know when I've entered this space, for example, when I feel really sluggish, you get to the point where you just can't be bothered.
Mm.
You know that there's a whole heap of stuff that you need to do, but there's no motivation.
Coffee sometimes helps.
Yeah.
Turkish
Yeah,
coffee.
coffee helps because it stimulates you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it lifts you up. And the other thing that is often common when we're in this space is we disconnect from ourselves. So often a response that we give to the people around is, I don't know. Start feeling really numb and disconnected. And if it's really severe, it goes all the way to being dissociated, where we can't tell the difference between what's real and what's not. So the good news is there are absolutely things that we can do to bring ourselves down when we're feeling really aroused, and help elevate what we're feeling if we're feeling really low and hypo-aroused. The key skill, the practice, the thing that we need to practice here is self-regulation, which is when we learn how to shift our emotions by changing what we focus on, by reframing our thinking, by being conscious of what we're doing with our body, and also self-soothing, which is all about how do we engage our senses and do things that help us feel better.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so what is some of the things we should do to control our stress? And where does excessive stress come from?
Yeah, it's a good question. Look, when we have a look at the function of stress, it's actually a good thing in right doses. We all know that stress is something that often pushes us into action. Yeah. What happens is something triggers our autonomic nervous system, And stress is actually, from a physical perspective, anything that triggers our autonomic nervous system. And what that does is it propels us into action. Except what happens is there's a tipping point. When stress becomes too much, it starts moving away from being a good thing into something that it becomes quite detrimental if it's happening for a long period of time, if it starts becoming chronic, or if it exceeds our coping capacity. So what's happening is your mind is perceiving there to be a threat or a danger. Perceiving is the word to underlie. It's imagined. Sometimes it's real, but most of the time it's imagined. And then your body physiologically starts acting as if that's real. So it kicks in the autonomic nervous system. We've all heard about that fight and flight response. Yeah. That's basically when your body's getting prepared to either run away because there's a threat, there's a danger, or what happens is it goes the other way and it shuts down, it freezes, and sometimes we move into a space of avoidance. So again, self-soothing, being able to do the things that help us to feel better, to relax us, to calm us down, like fishing, like cleaning, like cooking, doing the things that we enjoy that help us relax, whether it be, going for a walk, focusing on deep breathing, grounding ourselves. I love throughout the day, especially now because we're all inside due to the quarantine, just checking in with yourself and just noticing when you feel a little bit off and popping out into the garden for a few minutes. It doesn't have to be long. If you've got some grass in the backyard, kicking off your shoes and just really feeling the grass underneath your feet, noticing what's happening around you, smelling the flowers, noticing the greenery, becoming aware of what's going on. And what that really does is it helps you to be mindful and come back into the present, into the here and now. So becoming really conscious of what do we do that helps us to relax and feel better, I think is important.
Yeah, definitely. Look, visibly being a representative of Islam, how do you use your Islamic values with your work?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, isn't it? Yeah. Look, from a psychology perspective, clearly when you step into the clinic room, when you step into that therapeutic relationship, it's not about imposing your own beliefs onto someone else. That's not what this is about at all. But if we were to look at what is the role of faith and spirituality in healing, we need to understand that a person is holistic. What that means is there's different parts that need to come together for someone to be healthy as a whole. That's going to include the physical self, it's going to include the psychological self, the emotional self, and also the spiritual self. So the way that I will use faith is when I'm working with a client is to understand if this is a leverage point for that individual. And what that means is understanding whether faith and spirituality plays an important part in this person's life. And that leverage point is really something that is going to shift things with a minimum amount of effort, because people are willing to do for their faith sometimes what they're not willing to do for themselves. It's the same thing with parenting. Being a parent, being a mother or a father is often a leverage point, because same thing, parents will do for their kids what they're not willing to sometimes do for themselves.
Definitely.
One example I'll share with you is, again, going back to what we were speaking about earlier, in that we're always a role model to the people around us. We're always giving them an experience of who we are and what we represent. And now, clearly, being someone who is Muslim, wearing the hijab, this is what I'm representing, whether or not that's what I feel like I'm putting out, that this is my reality. And I remember one particular client that I was working with. It was a man who was probably in his 70s, really ochre Australian. And, came into the clinic for his first appointment, had a really warm, welcoming reception. something that I will often do with my clients is make them feel really welcome, offer them, glass of water, cup of tea, make them a coffee. I make it myself, so it feels like, you're coming into, a really safe space where, you're chatting over something to drink. It just feels a little bit more comfortable sometimes for people. This particular client got that same reception. He was seeing me because he was a victim of a crime, and I spent maybe 6 sessions with him. We got to know each other. And I remember at his very last session, he said to me as we were wrapping up, he said, look, I want to share something with you. I want to actually admit to something. I was like, yeah, sure. And he's like, when I first came here, I was really worried when I saw you with that scarf, with that thing around your head. And I thought, oh God,
He was scared.
Yeah. Yeah.
What did this guy look like? Was he like...
he was really built, really big.
Okay. And he's the one scared.
Right. Really like, oh my God, what's going on here? What are we in for? And he's like, I must admit I was a bit worried because I didn't know what to expect. And my experience of Muslims have always been what's been portrayed in the media. Mm-hmm. And he said, you know what, I want to really thank you because you helped me to see that there are other versions of being Muslim, other versions of Islam that we don't get to hear when all we have is the media. And then he said something that really cracks me up every time I think about it. And then he said, if anybody says anything nasty about Muslims, I'm going to punch them in the face. And that was his way of just sort of going, you guys are all right.
Yeah, and thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. How we hold ourselves is going to be, giving the people around us an experience.
Definitely. Okay. Look, you're also a lecturer in Istanbul. How did that come about?
That's a really interesting story, actually. So I think it was in 2015.
Because I think you go regularly there, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I go every semester. I first started lecturing at a university level in 2015 when I moved to Istanbul. I took about a year off from everything, and I thought, I really want to spend the next 12 months investing in me, doing the things that I love, traveling, reading, learning even more, exploring, going on adventures. And I moved to Istanbul for 12 months. Ended up being 18.
18 months.
18 months in the end.
There's so much to do there.
Oh my God.
I've only been there 2 weeks and it wasn't enough.
I was living there for 18 months, and in the end I was like, oh my God, I haven't done all the things I wanted to do in Istanbul. And then I realised that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
Because it's such a dynamic city. There's so much to explore. Turkey as a base is just so rich. Like, there's so much to see. And I think maybe 4 months into my sabbatical, I started getting bored. As someone who has a very, busy life, does a lot, all of a sudden being this woman of leisure started to, not be so much fun, because you get used to it. Like with anything in life, you get used to too much of a good thing. We need variety. So I contacted a friend. I was, had some good friends in Istanbul, and I started working. And one of my first positions was lecturing in Gaziantep, which is I think it's part of the eastern part of Turkey.
Yeah.
So what I was doing is I was living in Istanbul, teaching 3 days a week in Gaziantep, so flying back and forth every week. I did that for about a semester, and then I thought, oh God, that's a lot. Physically, that's a lot to be travelling so often. So I went back to my adventures, and it was on the day that I was boarding my flight back to Australia, back home. I got a call from the dean of this new university that was opening, Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul. And he said, I heard about the work that you've done. We're opening this university. Would love to see you in our team. And I was like, Hojam, I'm leaving today. And he's like, no, that's just the minor issue. We can sort that out. That became, the start of me joining the Ibn Khaldun family in Istanbul. I think it's been about 4 years now.
4 years, wow.
Yeah, time flies by. So what I do is I fly back and forth between Istanbul every year. And I stay there for about 3 to 4 weeks each time. I do all of my teaching in a block mode.
Yeah. Is it full on, or is it just like a few days a week?
It's pretty full on, because you can imagine a normal week, a normal semester spread out over 14 weeks. Yeah. So what we're doing is we're condensing all of that teaching and learning into about 3 to 4 weeks. It's also quite a good thing as well, because you can immerse yourself and the learning is happening at a rapid rate, and you've got the opportunity to really immerse yourself.
What subjects do you teach?
Yeah, 2 subjects that I'm really passionate about. I teach positive psychology, which is all about how do we build our sense of well-being, how do we tap into our unique strengths as a human being, how do we set healthy boundaries, how do we use faith and spirituality as a form of healing, how do we understand happiness and what makes us happy, and really using these things like gratitude and optimism and forgiveness as part of that healing process. Because, when we have a look at the history of psychology, the Western world has really been actively in this space since the World War I, I think it was, when really all of these people went off to war and they came back and they realised that some people were really, really traumatised as a result of the experiences that they had at war. So somewhere in the 1940s that they started to conceptualise different clinical psychological disorders, the sort of challenges that people were experiencing. And then before then, in the 1800s, Western scholars were beginning to do work around understanding the mind and why we do certain things. Often traditional psychology has been focusing on all of the things that have been going wrong. What's not working, focusing on that higher end of that mental health continuum and going, okay, what's the illness, what's the clinical disorder, what's not going right. Whereas positive psychology is all about the other end of the spectrum, to go, you know what, yeah, look, life is difficult, some things are not going as we would like them to be right now, but there are also things that are going really well, and helping us to tap into that side of stuff, to go, okay, well, what are things that aren't going well? What are some things that that we can draw on as a source of strength? And when you have a look at the history of psychology in Islam, it goes all the way back to, I think it's like 500 something. It was like the first psychiatry ward was opened up by a Muslim in Baghdad in 700 and something. Whereas round about the same time, I think, in the medieval times, if we're to go back to the medieval times, when someone had a mental health condition, they were perceived as being possessed by demons or evil spirits, and their way of dealing with that person and that condition, that mental health condition, was to either burn them or they would reject them from society and lock them up in very much a jail sort of system where these people were deprived of any healing modalities. And then you look at what like the Ottoman Empire was doing with the mentally unwell. They were entered the Shifahane, it was called. So it was not known as a hospital, but as a place of shifa, so a place of healing. Oh. Every single person had their own nurse. So they had very individualized care. And for the very first 3 days of their time in this location, they were given an order to rest. And then it wasn't until the 4th day that they would see a doctor to sort of understand what might be going on for them. they were exposed to sound as a form of healing. There's lots of documentation around how, sounds of water running, instrumental music was used as part of that healing process, and they were supported to reestablish that sense of well-being before they even tried to understand what was going on. Mashallah, we've got a lot to learn when we go back to the roots.
Definitely. There's always some interesting stuff when you do, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. The other subject that I teach is looking at the impact of culture on our psychology.
Okay.
So sort of understanding things like our family of origin and how that affects the person that we become, understanding stereotypes and racism, and sort of looking at how these factors might impact a person's psychology, and the way that their symptoms might show up when they're unwell.
Yeah. Look, what does research tell us about happiness?
Yeah. It's one of my favourite topics. I think I've got about 30 books alone on this area. Wow. Yeah, I love learning about this topic. Look, in essence, the research tells us that demographic factors such as age, gender, ethnicity, income, education are making no or very small impacts on our sense of happiness and life satisfaction. In fact, where income is concerned, the research tells us that we have a set point. So as long as we're able to meet our, core human needs, and we're able to, have food on the table and take care of our basic essentials, there comes a level of earning where beyond that it doesn't matter. So I think it's something like in the Western countries, $70,000 a year. Beyond that, how much you earn is not going to be impacting on your level of happiness. So what that means is really happiness is available to everybody. When you have a look at the people who are really happy, the research tells us that they're people who have good interpersonal skills, good number of friends and social connections. They're extroverted. Often they're in a stable relationship. And what this tells us, that other people matter. In fact, one research that was done about 15 years ago, who studied people who were the happiest, found that the common element was the people who are the most happiest are those that have got very strong social connections. So it's really, really important. And then personality traits are also playing a part in how happy we are. Stuff like being optimistic, so being able to see the best in things that are happening, having a good sense of self-esteem and confidence, and having an internal locus of control. And what that means is you believe that you have control over what happens to you. It's a very fascinating area, and research just keeps adding to it. In fact, I remembered a piece of research that came out a few years ago that showed that mindfulness can affect our brain connections and our brain structure, which is very fascinating. They did lots of MRI studies where they took pictures of the brains of these people that we're practicing mindfulness quite well and quite strongly, and they found that in fact these people have got stronger neural connections and larger brain volume. When you think about the equivalence of mindfulness in Islam, it's praying 5 times a day.
Yeah.
We stop doing what we're doing, and we come back into the here and now, and we become really present to our Creator in those moments.
Definitely.
So the Muslim version of mindfulness is five daily prayers.
True. Look, if anyone wants to find you, get in contact with you, what's the best way?
Look, I'm in private practice when I am in Australia. I'm practicing out of a clinic in Broadmeadows at the moment, and have been there for the last 10 years. Nasiha Consulting.
Okay.
So you can just look us up online.
We'll also put a comment in the description about, maybe your email address.
Yeah, if anybody's got any questions, I'm more than happy for them to get in touch.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for coming.
Pleasure.
No, and to our viewers, we would like you to subscribe, please, on YouTube and like our page on Facebook, and take care.